A couple days ago, I talked about where the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty ranks in the Super Bowl era and gave my personal opinion on that. But now I'm shifting gears and talking about the winner of Super Bowl 59. And I'm going to talk about how the Philadelphia Eagles can stack up in the NFL and what their chances are about becoming a dynasty of their own, as Kansas City has well established themselves as one. I've seen people give the talks if the Philadelphia Eagles can take that next step forward and become a dynasty along with the Chiefs in the 2020s. It's not as far fetched as you might think, and I hope this video explains it. So let's get on to it. To start things off, let's go back to 2017. The Eagles were coming off a frustrating 2016 season, but many thought they could improve, and they were right. Carson Wentz played at an MVP type level most of the season before he tore his ACL late in the season, and Nick Foles took over, and Philly finished with a 13-3 record and their first time clinching the division and a playoff appearance since 2013. They were also the number one seed in the NFC for the first time since 2004 when they lost in Super Bowl 39. In the playoffs, they nipped a win in the divisional against the defending NFC champion 28-3ers, and then steamrolled the surprising Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship to reach Super Bowl 52 against the dynasty and defending champion New England Patriots. In a 41-33 win, Nick Foles won Super Bowl MVP, and head coach Doug Peterson claimed that this would be the new norm, as the Eagles were Super Bowl champs for the first time in franchise history. Well, Dougie was kinda right. Winning the Lombardi was now an expectation in Philly, and they would win it again, just not with that particular team. Though the Eagles did make the playoffs in 2018 and 19, they were middling at best as they only managed one playoff win, and it was because the Chicago Bears choked in the wild card, i.e. the double doink. With losses to the New Orleans Saints and Seattle Seahawks respectively in the playoffs, people began giving that 2017 team the one-hit wonder label. But then the 2020 draft came and the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts 53rd overall. It was clear that the front office was starting to lose faith in Carson Wentz and thought that Foles was nothing more than a spot starter. In fact, Hurts was even the third-string backup behind Nate Sudfeld in 2020, as Wentz remained the starter. It didn't work out well, as the Eagles finished a putrid 4-11-1, last in the NFC East, and Hurts only saw playing time because, surprise, surprise, Wentz was hurt and they were well out of contention at that point. Nevertheless, the Eagles fired Peterson and traded Wentz after that disaster. In 2021, it was supposed to be a down year and throwaway season for the franchise as they named Jalen Hurts the starter and hired Nick Sirianni as their new head coach. To the surprise of most, Philly overachieved, going 9-8 and clinching a playoff berth. Even though they were embarrassed in the wild card by the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Eagles now had expectations going beyond, and they kept adding on to that team that went on a surprise run, mainly with the defense and trading for standout wide receiver A.J. Brown, and Tennessee is kicking themselves to this day for that. Hey guys, remember 2022 when they choked a second-half lead in Super Bowl 57? Many level-headed fans figured Hurts would have the Eagles right back now that he was establishing himself as one of the top and up-and-coming quarterbacks in the game. Well, 2023 came and it was a disaster after a 10-1 start. Philly went just 1-5 down the stretch, and Sirianni's job quickly seemed in jeopardy as he shuffled through top assistants. Hurts and Sirianni certainly rebounded much quicker than the previous Eagles regime, thanks in part to master roster building by general manager Howie Roseman. But the point is, getting back to Super Bowls, let alone winning them, is always a tall task in the NFL. I know I just went over a lot, but it was important context to provide for the sake of this video. So with all that being said, I can talk about 2024 for the Philadelphia Eagles. Philly went 14-3 in 2024 and breezed through the playoffs, culminating in a victory over the back-to-back Super Bowl champion dynasty Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. After a slow 2-2 start, the Eagles won 12 of 13 games after their Week 5 bye week, including winning 10 in a row from Week 6 to 15, and their only loss was by 3 points to their future NFC Championship game opponent and longtime rival Washington. And even then, Jalen Hurts had to exit the game early with an injury and had to go with backup QB Kenny Mittens for most of the game. Even then, it took a comeback for Washington to win. The offense was great and defense was dominant. While Philly finished second in the NFC, one game behind the 15-win Detroit Lions. Imagine saying that about them 20 years ago. There were people who thought that despite the season Detroit had, Philly was a better team. I myself was one of those people at some points in the season. Those folks turned out to be right. In the playoffs, the Lions were upset at home in the divisional by aforementioned Washington, and then Philly dropped 55 on them in the NFC Championship game, setting a record for most points scored in a conference championship in a 55-23 blowout. Before that, they beat the Green Bay Packers in the wild card and won in a snowy divisional game against the LA Rams. All in all, the Philadelphia Eagles scored 145 points in the playoffs, which is now an NFL record for the most points scored in the playoffs. They made it to their second Super Bowl in the last 3 seasons, and they faced the very team that broke their hearts in the Super Bowl a couple years prior in the Kansas City Chiefs. I obviously would not be making this video if the Chiefs won. Even so, if ever there were a team worth hyping as a legitimate Chiefs challenger moving forward, it was the Eagles. Don't let the 40-22 score fool you, the game was never close. Philly got off to a 17-0 lead thanks to a Cooper DeJean pick 6 and a 24-0 halftime lead. The Chiefs didn't score until the third quarter when they were down 34-6, and 2 more Philly field goals made it 40-6 at one point. The Chiefs got 16 garbage time points to pretty up the scoreboard, but I don't think anyone forgets how Philly's constant pressure on Patrick Mahomes and their aggressive offense stymied the Chiefs all night. Hurts is remarkably just 26 years old, despite already playing 2 strong Super Bowls. Jalen did have some doubters going into 2024, and with his masterful performance in Super Bowl 59 that won him the game's MVP, it's safe to say people will look at him entirely different moving forward. Jalen was extended in spring of 2023 and just completed year 2 of those 5 years, and he also has a no-trade clause. If his production continues, there won't be a question where he'll be after the 2027 season. Sirianni will only be entering year 5 atop the staff in 2025, and he may well have the sturdy Vic Fangio back as his top defensive aide. With a Lombardi now on his resume, he has entered the elite status of head coaches in the league, and maybe Philly faithful will let up on a little bit now. The rest of the superstar talent is both rich and young. Saquon Barkley is particularly the old guy just turning 28 on Super Bowl Sunday and put together arguably the best season by a running back in league history. 2,005 rushing yards, 5.8 yards per carry, 13 touchdowns, and a whopping 7 rushes of 50 yards or more. The only reason that he did not break Eric Dickerson's rushing record is because he was resting with the starters in Week 18. Had Philly not been all set for the playoffs, I have zero doubt the rushing record would be his. He also added 2 receiving touchdowns for good measure and rushed for 499 yards in the playoffs, 5 more touchdowns, and averaged 5.5 per carry. In my opinion, he should have been the first running back to win MVP since Adrian Peterson did it in 2012, but the Offensive Player of the Year, I don't think anyone's complaining about that a whole lot. With that elite offensive line and his explosiveness, I think it's safe to say Eagle fans are going to love seeing that for at least another 3 or 4 years, as he is under contract until 2026, but let's be honest, guys, there is no way the Eagles are going to move on from that if his production continues. Fellow playmakers like A.J. Brown is turning 27 as well, and he had a 1,000-yard receiving season for 67 receptions and 7 touchdowns, and Devonta Smith, only 26 years old, is locked up for the distant future as well. Smith was a solid number two option for 833 yards, 68 receptions, and 8 touchdowns. Dallas Goddard was a great security blanket with a 400-yard receiving season and a pair of touchdowns, completing the final season of his 4-year extension back in November of 2021. Meanwhile, the defense is stacked with first or second year stalwarts like Jalen Carter, who's only 23, Milton Williams, who's only 25, Cooper DeJean, who's 22, and Quinion Mitchell at 23 as well. Other standouts in Zach Bond, N'Kobe Dean, Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, CJ Gardner Johnson, and Reed Blankenship. This roster is absolutely loaded. The people higher up on the food chain are smart people who know today's NFL and know what they're doing. And the future for the Eagles is limitless when you take a look at everything at face value. As I just mentioned before, they have a lot of guys that are still on contract, and they're going to have to be smart about what they do in the offseason about who stays and who goes. To me, Zach Bond is the biggest free agent coming up as he was signed to a 1-year deal after being with the Saints and he had an all-pro season. The same can be said for Josh Sweat as he had a 3-year deal in 2021. Milton Williams is also a free agent and he may demand some bigger bucks after a 5-sack and 7-tackle for loss season as well. Brandon Graham does provide great veteranship for the Eagles, but at some point, he can't keep signing those 1-year deals and not exactly a spring chicken anymore. It's going to be interesting to see what Philly decides to do with him. Personally, a 2-time Super Bowl champion and 15-year player with the team has done more than enough to call it a career. With the team having $25 million in cap this spring, they could get more with salary dumps, i.e. James Bradbury and Darius Slayton. They have 7 picks in this spring's draft, and on top of this, having possibly the best GM in the league in Howie Roseman, knowing his draft history, I have faith that he will hit on all future drafts and these losses would become necessary losses for the Eagles. So here's my personal verdict with all this. I think the Eagles have a great chance of becoming a dynasty. Yes, every team loses pieces in the offseason, but Philly's just built different with stuff like this. When you're the defending champion, you're going to have a lot of teams knocking on your door when it comes to players or personnel. But Philly's a smart franchise. They're well ran, and they've proven before that they can stave off losing pieces just fine. I mean, it's their second Super Bowl title in a decade. To me, if they win at least 2 more rings between now and 2028, they're a dynasty. The window is wide open in Philly, and they won't be closing anytime soon. The team that I'm a fan of are the Eagles' state mates in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if the Steelers can't or won't win a Lombardi anytime soon, I'll pull for the Eagles to become a dynasty because they're a fun team to watch.